Welcome, everybody. So good to have you here. I'm joined today with Kaira Jewel Lingo. Hello, Kaira.
Hey, Lindsay.
Hi. And so today, Kaira is going to be joining us. She is a teacher with iBme, and she's also an international and national teacher of mindfulness, compassion, and Buddhist meditation. Kaira lived as a nun for 15 years in the Thich Nhat Hanh Monastery in the Zen lineage, and she teaches at the intersection of racial issues, climate, social justice, with a focus on activists, Black, Indigenous people of color, artists, educators, families, and youth. Kaira is now based in New York, and she is the author of a new book that's coming out this October, so this month. The book is entitled, "We Were Made for These Times: 10 Lessons on Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption." So Kaira, I'm so happy to have you here today joining us to talk about your book and to be specifically applying the wisdom of this book to people who are working with youth, working with teens as teachers of mindfulness and meditation.
Thank you. It's really nice to be with you.
So my first question, Kaira, is how might this book support teachers and teens to take care of themselves when they notice strong emotions, when they notice uncertainty arising in their lives? Because I know, at least for me, for many of us, this past year and a half has been one of a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change, a lot of turmoil in the world. So how would you say the wisdom of this book applies to teachers working with teens?
Sure. So I think what all of us probably first do when we have difficult emotions is we want them to stop. And or we get consumed by them. And so they take us over. And there's wisdom in this book on how to be with these emotions, also how to help others be with emotions, because once we are able to do this for ourselves, it's much easier to guide others when we've experienced like turning toward a painful or difficult emotion and befriending it, caring for it. But the whole book is really, helping us when we hit these bumpy times, which, we could say we've all really had a bumpy time this last year and a half with the pandemic and so many different kinds of pandemics that are assaulting us. When we hit these times, we really need to know how to come home to ourselves, how to be with ourselves, with our breath, with our body. And that's what allows us to be there with our emotions when they're really kind of volcanic and, turning toward them, but also resourcing ourselves, having basic practices that we can ground ourselves in so that we don't get overwhelmed when something really difficult arises. So there's lots of different support in the chapters of the book to both directly turn towards painful emotions, but also to do the resourcing that helps us not completely lose it when things aren't going expected or when things are unknown and uncertain and out of our control.
Absolutely. And Kaira, just thinking about the role of being a teacher, and I know that you also are a teacher and you train teachers, there's a lot of uncertainty in being a teacher. And I would imagine as well, especially working with teens, this is an age group where there's a lot of strong emotions present in general. And I'm curious if you could speak to that in your experience of working with teens and training teachers, how you see teachers navigating that uncertainty and the intensity that they might experience in a classroom setting, and what wisdom you've gleaned from that.
Yeah, thank you. Um, you know, I think there's so much to really be said for being with what is in the moment. Um, yes, we really need to prepare. That can help a lot with that feeling of anxiety of what could be, what if the class responds this way? Okay, I'll have this as a backup. Those kind of things are really important to know, what we can go to if something's not working, or if we need something to calm, or if we need something to animate. We can have these things kind of prepared. But we all know from our experience in teaching that things so often don't go the way we planned, even when we have the best preparation. And so, really being able to be in the moment to respond to what's actually happening. I was just interviewing a teacher who's also a Dharma teacher. He was a math teacher for over 30 years, and he wrote a book about mindfulness and teaching. So I was interviewing him, and he was telling a story about being, with this class of ninth graders after lunch who didn't want to pay attention. And he had a really hard time getting them to focus. And he decided to ask them in a kind of anonymous survey, what's going on? How are you doing when you come to class? And through just the students saying, look, it's after lunch, I'm really tired, he figured out, let's do some Qigong movement to bring up energy. And they started every class with a few minutes of movement. And they were fine when they were able to just be honored in what their real experience was in their bodies and their minds. So that's, to me, we so often think we have to come with all the solutions, but the kids have, whoever we're working with, whether it's adults or children, teens, there's so much wisdom in the group that we can also access and tune into by just being there, versus it's supposed to happen like this, it's not happening like this, I have to control this, or so kind of opening to what is the wisdom in this moment that's being called for, and being able to address, really address, even to recognize what's happening for us as we come, across some kind of stumbling block, like I'm feeling anxious. Like being able to know what's happening inside of us in the moment can be so helpful, because then we're not completely identified with our anxiety. If mindfulness is there saying, oh, I'm anxious because my lesson plan, this isn't going to fly. Nobody's listening, or, the things I thought were going to be here aren't here. So can I know that I'm struggling in this moment? Bring kindness to that experience. Maybe take a pause and listen and see, okay, what is this moment asking for? I think the ability to pause and kind of reassess and listen can be very transformative, rather than, that tendency to barrel through because we're so uncomfortable with the unknown. We just want to push and smooth it all over, and we're in control, or we know what we're doing. But what would it mean to actually just, oh, well, in this moment I'm not so sure, and hanging out there can open actually possibilities that can be much more responsive to the realities of the moment. But it requires trust to do that. That's a practice as well that we can build.
Kaira, as you're speaking, the word vulnerability comes to mind. And this sense that as you're describing it, and I can feel it in your body language, this sense of pausing, slowing down, relaxing into the moment, and opening to what that moment of uncertainty or stress in the classroom, for example, what that might look like. And it feels quite vulnerable in a way to open ourselves up to that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember as when I was a nun, we were doing the children's program. We had a bunch of kids, several monastics, and one monk was trying to teach pebble meditation to the children with pebbles. And one child was just really not wanting to, had other agenda and was talking and playing around. And it just was like impossible to do this meditation. And so the brother leading just stopped trying to teach it and started naming out loud what he was experiencing, not in a punishing way, not in a blaming way, but just like, wow, I'm noticing I'm getting frustrated because I'd really like to share this with you all. And it's not possible. And he opened the space actually for the kids to explore together what was going on, to be mindful of this moment of like disruption and how to address that together with mindfulness. So what's going on here? How can we be with this? And it was a very moving thing to witness him not try to control this child, but to just be very honest, very vulnerable, as you said. Like, I'm struggling here. I thought we might do this, but this isn't happening. And what do you all think? Then the class got very still and very present because it was a very different dynamic suddenly.
Beautiful. Kaira, yesterday I was having a conversation with Mark Wax, who's also a teacher for iBme, and he was talking about this concept of adultism and being aware of when we're trying to enforce power over our students or children, teens.
Yeah.
And what you're saying when you're talking about also speaks to that. The word control popped up for me, and it's this example that you just beautifully described. It feels like that practice of naming and being with and accepting, like, hey guys, I'm here with you and I'm having an experience here of frustration and trying to grapple with this. There's a way that almost takes out that hierarchy of power where I'm the teacher and you're the student and I'm making you do this thing, to more like, hey, I'm right here with you. And I'm also a human having this experience and I'm not trying to control you.
And exactly. And how, to me, the whole point of teaching any person, younger or older, meditation is for them to be able to recognize what's happening inside of them, also around them. So for the person leading the meditation to say, hey, this is what I'm noticing coming up in me, that's already the teaching, that, right? That's the transmission right there. If they don't get anything else, they got witnessing someone acknowledge like painful things that were coming up in them without judgment, without blaming.
Absolutely. It's like if you were saying to someone, be with your experience, but you're like, be with your experience, or like, be with your experience, but I don't approve of your experience. Like, you're sending such mixed messages. Yeah. And what do you find is the challenge that you've experienced yourself or that you've witnessed with teachers? What are the main challenges that come into that ability to be with and pause and go with the flow of what's happening?
I think a lot of it is this sense that we're supposed to be in control, and we're supposed to know what's going to happen, which is what gets us in trouble in all parts of our lives, right? Because we never get to be in control and we never get to know what's going to happen. And we can close down in this need to kind of keep it all together and have it, the way we think it's supposed to go, to where we're actually not present, or our heart isn't really open, even to ourselves, let alone to our, class, our students, or just what's unfolding. And so, one of the chapters in the book is accepting what is. And it's not that you just lay down and let life steamroll over you. You do need to make decisions and take actions towards what you want, towards what you see as important. But my experience is that that's a lot more effective, especially in a teaching role, if we're already attuning to what's in the moment, right? So if there's some conflict between students in our class, in our group, being with that allows you to come up with a response that's really helpful, versus the attitude, this shouldn't be happening, someone's wrong because this is happening, I'm wrong, or they're wrong, or whatever this is wrong. That puts us in an adversarial relationship, and we don't have as much at our disposal, versus, okay, these students are in conflict, what's possible here? It's actually softening into, it's like this, it sucks, I'd rather this weren't the case, but it is. So what's available to me now that I have opened fully to the fact that this is like that? So then we actually have more accessible to us, like in our own neurobiology, because we're not in this kind of fight, flight, freeze experience with life. We're like, okay, it's not good, but I have some choices still. How might I be supportive to both of these people? How might I encourage the class to be supportive? How might I, draw on any resources that are available to me beyond the class to be supportive?
That's beautiful, Kaira. And that very much resonates in my own life, of times where I've been navigating situations that seem difficult and that are maybe stimulating a strong response in my own nervous system, that if I'm able to somehow expand around that experience and create a space of safety within my own nervous system and mind, then it's as though like those possibilities can come in, like what else could be possible, how could this be handled in the most effective way, because I'm no longer in that reactive state. And I think that is quite different from acceptance in the form of just, as you said, being steamrolled over and saying whatever goes is good. It's almost like an internal acceptance of not resisting the emotional mental reaction within me as a teacher, for example, and through that non-resistance, creating enough space for a higher level solution to come forward.
Yes, exactly. And it's almost like, those things, I really feel they're waiting to jump in and be helpful to us. Like there are just like things from all sorts of places we'd never expect, where, help can come, but we're not open to it if we're fighting the situation. But when we are like, okay, I can't change this, this is how it is, it's like our hands are like this. And then something can fall into our hands from who knows where, that's where, oh, okay, this will help me. So actually that surrendering and saying, I don't know what to do, it's a very fruitful place to be, I've found, where things can find their way to us because now we're open. Whereas when we're like, I gotta figure this out, or I don't want this, or there nothing can come into our system because we're so charged and closed in a way.
Yeah. Kaira, I'm curious if you have an example of that, just to ground it, like as a teacher, a moment where you were able to surrender and open your hands and a new solution came in a moment of conflict.
Yeah. Well, one just general I'll share when I facilitate sharing circles. Sometimes someone will share something kind of more sensitive or kind of, and I'll feel like, oh, as the facilitator, I should step in and figure out I'll be thinking, how can I respond to that in a supportive way? Sometimes that's helpful, but I've noticed sometimes if I just don't try to fix whatever someone has brought to the circle, invariably the next share or the next share after that will be the most perfect response to what that person shared that I could never have shared, because they have the same experience, or they're speaking from. So anytime when I'm like, oh God, I got to do something to help this situation, I've noticed so often if I just keep my mouth shut, it's this wild thing. The group has a wisdom, and then just the right thing gets said to that person or to that situation. So that's a general thing. And a specific situation of conflict is I had a group where two people really had a falling out. It was a small group. So one person kind of wanted to leave the program, and I didn't know, what was going to happen. I didn't want them to leave. I thought it would be a big loss for them, and I just decided to talk to them, talk to the other person, and then use this practice from Plum Village of beginning anew when there is a conflict, to see if they would be willing to have, it took they needed some time, but then I asked them to reflect, each of them, on the good qualities of the other, on any things they regretted, each of them, what they brought to the situation that they regretted, and then what was their hurt. So those were the three things they should reflect on. And then if they were really willing to have a honest, open communication with the other, I would facilitate. So but I didn't have to do anything really. I just had to hold the space. They had unwound the knot by themselves, just in that sharing, just in reflecting on what was good in the other person, what did they bring to the conflict, and then they could understand their hurt in light of the whole thing, and there was a lot of appreciation for each other. So that was an experience of, actually, I don't have to make this better. I can give tools, and if they're in the space to really reconcile, they will do it, and they did. And she stayed in the program, and it was a beautiful experience for all of us.
Amazing. And one thing I'm noticing as you speak is this quality of being the energetic anchor and the holder of space. So as you were describing the situations, it's almost like you were creating the container, and you were focused in the moment, but your focus was not on providing a solution or fixing the problem, but more so like staying as that centered, receptive presence that then facilitated other people in bringing their wisdom and bringing the solution for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And, something that Thich Nhat Hanh would say about our community, our Sangha, when there would be any sort of conflict or misunderstanding, he would say, well, everyone is practicing. So it's not possible that transformation won't happen, because if we are practicing, then the knots inside of us, the knots between us, they will transform. So we can trust that. We can trust our practice. We can trust each other's practice. So it's in the field, right? If we're putting ourselves in a practice situation.
And what more perfect a way to practice than being a teacher of mindfulness, because we're trying to bring that practice out into the world. But in bringing it out into the world, we're not only dealing with our own inner landscape, but we're also dealing with the entire landscape of the class and the system and the people around us. And I like what you're saying about like welcoming that in. And I know for myself, some of my tendencies as a meditator has been to, okay, let me just close my eyes and go inside and shut off the world. But that doesn't really work, because like the world is the place to be practicing all of this. It's like, what if everything I need to learn is actually what this angry student is bringing in this moment, because I'm in resistance to what they're bringing, and that's showing something to me that maybe I wouldn't access if I were just trying to have a solo practice.
Totally. It is in our relationships that we wake up in these encounters with life, however it comes at us, right? We really can grow.
I'm curious about some of the ways, Kaira, that your students have taught you.
Yeah. I think all these things we've been talking about, like really showing me my own limited beliefs and my own misconceptions, like this illusion that I have to fix things. I mean, of course, as teachers, we are responsible for holding the space, but that needs to happen with a lot of respect for each person's unique path, that we don't know what it is, right? And so I think, yeah, like humility is a big lesson I've received from my students about it's not about me, it's not about what I create or make happen, it's about how I support them to have the experience they most need to have. So this really like listening and following their lead in some way. Like, yes, you come with your preparation and what you think is going to be most supportive, whatever your topic or theme is, but then really like connecting to what they care deeply about, so that your teachings correspond to what they need. Yeah. And I also, one thing too, I've learned from my students is it's okay to be firm, and there can be real gentleness and love in a really clear, you can really say what you need or what needs to happen, and it's not something that's harmful.
Kaira, as someone who has sometimes walked that line between, for myself, being harsh and aggressive versus this more compassionate and firm way of leading or teaching, I'm curious if you could speak to the distinction between those two, and how people who are teachers might be able to find that firmness and that structure in a more loving way.
Mm-hmm. it's a lot about clarity, like um, being clear what our role is, what their role is, even though we also know that we're more than our role, they're more than their role. But this sense of, you know, the Buddha said, wise speech doesn't always feel good to the person receiving it. That doesn't mean it's not what needs to happen. And of course, there's many things about wise speech. It should also be kind, it should be helpful, it should be timely, it should be useful. But there are also situations in which the Buddha said it may be upsetting, but that doesn't mean if it fulfills these other categories that it's unwise. And so I think it's really important to know our intentions as teachers, that we're not there to, to oppress or create harm, but that if you can create a very clear boundary out of love. You can say things that are firm, that are not pleasant to hear, out of love. So I think it's really clear. It's really important to be clear where we're coming from as teachers. There's a beautiful story, just briefly, in Lama Rod Owen's book. He's also an iBme teacher, Love and Rage. And just to paraphrase it briefly, it's a story of this, a Black woman is on a train in Boston. A bunch of youth she's trying to get off. A bunch of youth are pushing to get in a kind of rude way. So people are trying to get off and they're making them wait by coming in a rowdy way. Before the train departs, she holds open the doors and she looks at them and she speaks to them very directly. And she said, I just need to tell you what you all did isn't right. I'm telling you this, to help you. And she was upset, but she wasn't lashing out. She was naming that this isn't right. But she wasn't saying, you are bad. She was just saying, you need to know this was not helpful behavior. So she stopped the train by keeping the doors from closing. So it's just a very powerful story of how you can name honestly what's not okay, but your intention is a loving one. Even if you're still upset about it, you're not like just kind of dumping your emotion on them. You're holding it, but you're in a very focused way saying no to a behavior that's not okay.
That resonates so much, Kaira. And in hearing your story, imagining myself in the shoes of that person, it feels like when emotions are strong and there's anger or really strong feeling, we as teachers or as people practicing in that moment, we need to expand our energy so that it's not however much charge there also needs to be that much love and that much space around it, so that people, and when we do that, I think that people can feel it, that it feels different when we're coming from that place of centeredness and love, even if there's fury underneath it or frustration or pain. And what you're saying about connecting to the intention and connecting, for me, I would say connecting to my body, connecting to my emotions and sensing, am I expansive enough in this moment to really hold that line in a firm, loving way, or does it feel off balance?
I love what you said about the love being as big as the charge, because think about how much care she had to have to do that. Like when we say these no's when they need to be said, like it would be so much easier in so many ways to not say anything, right? But it's so full of care, actually, to catch, to catch that moment and not just let it go. So it's all about the love.
That's amazing. One of my teachers was describing this process and made an analogy to if you had someone who had a finger or an arm that had gotten very cold and had gotten gangrene, and a doctor sees this patient and knows that the most effective and compassionate thing to do is to amputate that part of the body. It might be seen as severe in that moment, like, how dare you, or that's so horrific, but it's actually the kindest thing that can be done. And it reminds me of your story, and even in a teaching capacity, that being truly loving does not just mean allowing anything to happen, and that our students appreciate that when there is that firmness that's balancing the love.
Yeah, yeah. They learn a lot from it, I think, because it's not something we see modeled all the time.
Absolutely.
It's often one of the other extremes, but to see both together, this clear, this is a no, and I care very much for you. That's real beauty.
Mm. And I would imagine that that's something, as teachers of mindfulness, to be practicing that balance within ourselves all the time, so that when those more highly charged situations might arise in our life or as teachers, we are able to expand and meet the challenge of that moment, so that we can be with our classes and students in those difficult moments without ignoring or going into harshness ourselves.
Definitely. Yeah.
So Kaira, we'll wrap up in just a few moments here, but anything else that's coming to life for you, especially around this book, We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons on Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption. Any other nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to share around how this applies to especially teachers of mindfulness?
Sure. That's just the last thing I would say is, speaking of the need to prune in our teaching lives, it's also really important to put in the compost and to nurture the good, to really add in the things that we want to see grow, both in ourselves and in our students. So just there's so much that gets easier when we can create joy, when we can create moments of appreciation, like genuinely letting the people we are working with know that we see them, we see their goodness, setting up occasions for them to express appreciation to each other. It's so powerful to really nurture the wholesome seeds that are in each of us and longing to be watered. And that's just, it's really possible to do that on a daily basis with people we are in relationships with, as well as ourselves, as well as our students.
Fantastic. Well, Kaira, it has been such a joy talking with you. And I'm so grateful for you to be sharing your wisdom and experience with us and with those who are watching this video. And I just want to reiterate, so Kaira has a book, We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons on Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption. And it's coming out the 19th of October. Is that right?
That's right.
Fantastic. And so how can folks get a copy of this book, Kaira, if they're interested in reading more?
Sure. Well, it's available on Amazon. It's also available through Parallax Press. And I would encourage you also to support Black-owned bookstores. There are a couple lists of different ones on, I think, indie books. But support your local bookstore, Black-owned bookstores especially, and you can buy it through many of them. And Penguin Random House, you can order advance copies as well. Just Google Penguin Random House and We Were Made for These Times.
Beautiful. And Kaira, if anyone wants to reach out to you or follow you as a teacher, what would the best way be for them to do that?
You can go to my website, kairajewel.com, and you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter there. And you can also find me on Facebook. I have a teaching page, Kaira Jewel, and I'm on Instagram, YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, so a couple different ways.
Amazing. Well, Kaira, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for those of you who are watching and listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day and be well.
Thank you so much, Lindsay.